Hi there, Jonathan here. The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website where you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. That's at www.jonathanfoust.com. Thank you and enjoy. Did you notice how that fan turned off right when the meditation stopped? We paid someone to do that just for your growth. So I hope you found that meditation helpful, restful. One thing you may not have thought of, it's something a teacher pointed out to me many years ago, that there's a certain benefit you get from the meditation practice itself. But there's a hidden benefit, and that is all the trouble you didn't get into because you were sitting with your eyes closed. So you have to keep that in mind. There's a story of a United Way volunteer who had done some research in her organization, and they found there was a person in their community, a lawyer, a very wealthy guy who had made $500 the year previous and had never made a donation to the United Way. So she asked for a meeting and was invited into his office, and she said, our research has revealed that you made $500,000 last year, and we're wondering if you've ever thought of, giving back to the community. It's a long pause, and he looked at her and he said, "So, did your research reveal the fact that my mother recently died and her medical expenses exceeded her income?" And she said, well, no. He said, "And did your research reveal that my brother, who's a veteran and blind in a wheelchair, requires financial support?" And she started getting very embarrassed, said, no, and with kind of rising indignation, he said, "And did your research reveal that my brother-in-law died and left 3 kids needing support?" She said, no, I'm so sorry. And he went on, he said, "So if I didn't give any money to them, what makes you think I need to give money to you?" So tonight I'd like to give a talk on generosity. And actually this is the first of 10 talks on what are called the paramis, or the paramitas, which are, it's a horrible translation, but they're called the 10 perfections. And of course that implies anything less than that is wrong. But you can think of them as qualities that you can cultivate, that help to cultivate a kind of a wholesome character. So, in brief, the first one is generosity, or the art of giving of yourself to others. The second is virtue, or proper conduct in the world. The third is renunciation, of letting go what is not needed, but embracing what is important. The fourth is about cultivating transcendental wisdom, insight into reality. The next is cultivating energy and diligence and the vigor that's required to be present to your life and all of your challenges. The next is cultivating patience and tolerance, and acceptance. The next is cultivating truthfulness, your capacity to be truthful and see truth. The next is on determination, or being resolute with what you know to be true. The next is on loving kindness. And the final talk is on serenity, cultivating serenity, or equanimity, kind of a steadiness in the midst of all the fluctuations of the internal and the external life. So this one is about cultivating a generous heart. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what are the teachings, like what did the Buddha teach about generosity? A little bit on how when you take on generosity as a practice, how it can profoundly shift your consciousness. There's a cycle to generosity which we sometimes overlook, which is critical. And the power of action, to kind of contemplate what it means to be generous. So the Buddha's life, many of us are familiar with it. A large portion of his life was being very arduous and focused, to see into the nature of reality. And a lot of his practice was around extreme diligence. And in the midst of all those austerities and self-denial, of course, he came into greater and greater realizations as to the nature of reality. And when he had his awakening, again, according to the mythology of the Buddha, he initially thought, I can't teach this. No one's going to be interested. No one's going to get it. And so he contemplated for a long time, like this can't be translated. But then he thought of some of his friends, some of his meditation buddies, and he thought, well, maybe they'll get it. And that began his teaching. And the very first teaching he offered was about generosity. So the very first attempt to translate his perception of reality was best expressed in cultivating a generous heart. So that's the very first of these 10 perfections, if you will. So it might be helpful to start with a short reflection. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And you might just deepen your breath for a moment, and you might just bring into mind a time, maybe recently or maybe long ago, when you were generous. Think of a time when you did something kind or good for another person. And if you can't think of one, you can make it up. Maybe when you gave a gift and it was met with delight. And as you reflect on that offering, what does it feel like on the inside? Is there a feeling that forms, that comes from giving? And in your own way, just saying hello to that. And then if you like, you can deepen your breath and you can open your eyes, or another option is you can have your eyes closed during the talk. There's an amazingly counterintuitive approach to happiness, and that is through the act of being generous. The essence of teachings, in my understanding, from the Buddha is where the Buddha said, nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine. Nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine. And when you think about the moments, the transcendent moments in your life, which may have to do with just being in nature or an ecstatic connection to life, or a moment of intimacy, a moment of feeling love, in those moments you may notice that sense of I and mine either isn't present or it's really loosened up quite a bit. So the act of generosity is about softening that sense of a tightly bound sense of I and mine. when you are generous, it moves you from being a tightly bound, fear-based self to one that is interconnected and interdependent. And so what Buddhist philosophy says that anything you hold on to is going to bind you. Your stress and suffering is directly related to what you're holding on to, what you're identified with, what you're clinging to. So the opposite is when you can let go, you'll feel more freedom. You let go a little bit, you'll feel a little bit more freedom. You let go a lot, you'll feel a lot more. So really, that's it in its essence. When you practice generosity, you begin to shift your sense of self. And when you take it on as a practice, it becomes an amazing mirror. You get to see your own selfishness. So it becomes being selfless versus being selfless. Not shellfish, that's another talk. So I've attempted to take on this practice of generosity in my life. But I had a really very interesting experience of it last week. I was asked to give a talk to an organization in D.C. called Cadre. You may have heard of it. It's an organization for business people, movers, shakers, CEOs who kind of want to network and support each other in their professional and personal lives. And I was invited to come and give a talk about, the potential of meditation and what it can, the changes it can bring about in your life. So afterward, this was at the waterfront, where the Ferris wheel is, and I had never been there before. Kind of a cool place. Afterward, I went out to dinner with my friend Tony, who was there, and we were walking around looking for a restaurant where I could find something vegan that I could eat. So we found a Chinese restaurant that's usually pretty safe. So we had a great meal. It was really fun to hang out with my friend Tony, who I've known for many years. And I had ordered a vegetarian pad thai. And this was a bowl of pad thai that tasted kind of like, those dried ramen noodles you put in the hot water. I counted 3 pieces of broccoli, and I estimated there were about 4 crushed peanuts in this little bowl. I estimated the value of that plate was somewhere between $2.95 and $3.25. And Tony ordered a seafood dish, but like his bowl was a little bit bigger than my fist, and I saw a couple shells in it. So there's shellfish in this talk. We didn't order any drinks, and we didn't have any side dishes. We didn't have any dessert, and the bill was $60. My initial reaction, I was, shall we say, peeved, and then a little more than peeved. I felt brazenly ripped off, and my immediate reaction was to give a really lousy tip. And then I saw it. I saw my self-righteousness. I saw my anger, my wanting to punish or make a statement. And the truth is, our servers were fine people. They ushered us in. They took care of us. One fellow looked a little troubled. The other fellow had his hair was shaved up high with a ponytail. It was an interesting-looking guy. But they were doing the best job they could. And so I gave a big tip, as I usually try to do, to err on the side of being generous. So you know what it's like when you feel wronged? how immediately you want to be right and make that statement. The Buddha said, if by giving up a lesser happiness, one could experience greater happiness, a wise person would renounce the lesser to behold the greater. So it became an opportunity for me to see clearly that these servers were not the bad guys. They were doing the best job they could. So this is part of the training in generosity, to train yourself to see the good. And of course, I fail all the time. But when I can do that, I can move from being a tightly bound, judgmental, self-protective, avoiding domination self to opening up to new possibilities. Of course, there's a balance there, you know. Does it mean that I would go back to that restaurant? No way. You know, does it mean I'd recommend it to anyone else? No way. Does it mean I might write a lousy review on Yelp? Absolutely. You know. So being generous and seeing the good in others doesn't mean you don't stand up to bullies. It doesn't mean you condone behavior that is filled with greed or aversion or delusion. But it does come back to each of us. How can I be generous here? How can I look for the good? So then the question becomes, well, how exactly can you be generous? Over the years, I've worked with different boards of directors and so forth, and there's a constant searching for who would be a good board member, and it's always comes down to the 3 W's. You're looking for either wealth, wisdom, or work. Someone who can support an organization financially, someone who's got a lot of wisdom who can help offer some guidance, or someone who's willing to roll up their sleeves and contribute in a really dynamic way. And it becomes a very interesting reflection for yourself if you cultivate a more generous intention in your life. What is it that you can offer? Is it wealth? Is there a way that you can support others financially? Is there a way that you can offer your wisdom? Or is it where that you can actually roll up your sleeves and get involved? The Buddha spoke quite a bit in his day about the power of offering wisdom. That when you see someone who's suffering, to really pause and to take time to be with them, which sometimes can simply be to be a good listener. You know, to ask how you can support this person in wherever they may be struggling. But it's one thing to take on giving and being generous as part of your spiritual practice, but that's not the whole story. There was a very well-known, like nationally known Dharma teacher who's always been a source of inspiration for me since I was in college. Actually, he wasn't a Dharma teacher when I was in college, but I knew of him. And I love his readings, and I had the opportunity to do a retreat with him. He was coming to speak to a retreat. And I've read his stuff, and I've been inspired by him, and it really kind of supported me in this life. And so as he was coming in to the building, I took that opportunity to thank him. I told him what a difference he made in my life. I told him how he had inspired me to become a teacher. And I went on for a little while. But you know what he did? He blew me off. He kind of averted his eyes. He kind of mumbled something, and then he just kind of moved on. I understand there could be other factors there. Maybe he really needed to get to a bathroom. Maybe he was running late. Maybe he was worried about the talk that he wanted to give. Maybe he's painfully shy, really deeply introverted. But this guy who I admired, for many, many years, do you know what I was thinking about him afterward? Screw you, buddy, It was so revealing. Part of the cycle of generosity is when you are offered generosity is to actually receive it. And I got for myself, I felt completely not heard, not seen, and not acknowledged in a very sincere desire to express my thanks to him. And maybe you've noticed it for yourself, that when you get a compliment, you sidestep it or blow it off. And that's what I did chronically in my life. Whenever I would be thanked, I would just sort of minimize it and deflect it. But being on the receiving end of that really, really opened my eyes. There's a great book called The Charisma Myth. It's written by a meditation teacher, not a meditation practitioner. And the essence of the book is that having charisma is a myth. It's all behavioral. And your charisma shows up as power, it shows up as presence, and it shows up as compassion. And she talks what it's like to sort of shut off that compassion piece. And so you can try this on. This really made a difference for me. When someone offers you a compliment, this is what you do behaviorally. You listen until they're done. You wait 1 full second. You then let a feeling come up and express it on your face. And then you say, thank you. I appreciate that coming from you. It's really powerful practice. And there's something about that waiting for 1 full second that actually provides a little gravitas, where you're really acknowledging that you're receiving what is being offered. It's really helped me to slow down and really helped me to really hear when someone is being generous to me, or to really receive someone being generous to me. Very challenging because it's not you usually feel a little vulnerable when you're actually really receiving something, an act of kindness or generosity from another. So we're finding our way in life. And for many of us, we've learned how to kind of minimize our own needs, so we're not disappointed. But when we engage into life and you act out of generosity, inevitably you receive generosity. And stopping and pausing to take that in is so important. So for many years of my life, I lived a very simple life. I had a vow of simplicity and so forth. And when I sort of moved from the monastery back into the marketplace, I realized, wow, I have to make a living here. One of my main goals in life has been to be able to pay for my own funeral. And, I don't have kids. I don't want to be a burden. I want to live simply and save so that I won't be a burden to those around me. And it's easy to kind of to shut down on the receiving piece. And we all do that. So another reflection, if you will. You can again close your eyes and you might deepen your breath a little bit. You might bring into mind just one person in your life who at one point was kind or generous to you. For no good reason, express their care for you, or we're thoughtful. And you might now deepen your breath and let that reflection open up a little bit. And just take the next minute in silence to reflect on all the gifts that you have been given in this life. And as you breathe, you might sensitize yourself to what it feels like inside, to reflect on those who've been kind and generous to you. And when you're ready, you can again deepen your breath, and if you like, you can open the eyes. There's a beautiful story in kind of the Buddhist lineage of King Ashoka. And King Ashoka was a warrior king. And this was somewhere in Burma, or I think it was maybe Burma. And he was exposed to the Buddhist teachings, and he realized that his whole life of sort of conquering and dominating wasn't really in alignment with what his heart was telling him. And so he dramatically re-engineered the society to be based on the Buddhist principles. And you see this when you go into these Buddhist countries, particularly the ones that have kind of the orthodox practices. So when you want to practice meditation in Southeast Asia, you can go to any community and you'll be housed and you'll be fed and you'll be given medicine and you'll be supported by the local community. If you see the monks going for their alms rounds, you'll see these little kids when the monks come round, tiny little kids who are held up to put a handful of rice into the bowl. It's such a built-in part of their culture to be generous. When you look at the percentage of income that's given from the west to the east, it's really quite remarkable how much is freely given. So King Ashoka, in his life, had one of his scribes record his acts of generosity, because he really just wanted to kind of track what this was to take on as a practice. And at the end of his life, as the story goes, he had those lists read back to him. And there's a beautiful teaching about what it means to be generous, that there are three benefits. There is the pleasure associated with the thought of being generous. Then there is the act of generosity itself. And then there is the pleasure of the reflection on being generous. And when I think back to those two waiters at that raunchy restaurant, I have pleasure in the fact that I was generous to them. It's a very wholesome feeling. I was so touched by that story of King Ashoka that my father, as he was dying, I told him the story of his life through the lens of his generous acts. And it was a really beautiful moment just to see the good in his life and reflect that back to him. But there's a sense of balance here, finding your balance in how you give and how you receive. And the teachings after King Ashoka died, the teachings on generosity became corrupted. There was a little more emphasis on the benefits you would get from giving. And so wealthy people would give in order to gain favor with the monks or the religious hierarchy. And that was encouraged, and it kind of fed that, the whole kind of egoic nature of those communities. And so I'm always conscious because much of what I do is offered in this system of generosity where the teachings are considered priceless, so you can't put a price on them. So they're offered freely so that no one is denied access to these teachings for tonight and the retreats that we lead. There's part of me that doesn't want to mention it at all, but there's also something about having the prosperity that comes from generosity that supports this class and supports the church and ensures that anyone who's interested is welcome to come and participate. And so we all need to find our balance in how we give. How much you give freely, how much you give with strings attached, how you receive, how you might manipulate to receive more, how much you can receive what's freely given. It's a perfect mirror. It reflects back your intention. Earlier this year, I wanted to kind of explore my relationship to all the people I've met throughout my life. I kind of made a list. I called it my karma cleaning list. You know, that those who I had wronged or those who I felt out with, that I was going to make some conscious effort to make amends or to kind of clean that up. It's been very fulfilling. I kind of have my list and I pace myself. You know, where I really take time to be thoughtful and reach out, and I've connected with people that some who haven't wanted to respond, but others, it's been really, really powerful. But another element another list that I have is, as I reflect back on those who have been generous to me, I really reflect back on how I may not have really thanked them, or I may not have reflected back to them how much their act of generosity really meant to me. It's hard to track some of these people down. You know, when I was getting my master's degree, my supervising teacher was really influential, and I don't recall really saying thank you in a really meaningful way. I was too busy on my way somewhere else. After I got my master's degree, the head of an English department in New Mexico found my file and hid it. And then when it was time to request me to be on his staff, presented the file and got me hired. What an awesome move on his part. And again, I haven't spoken to him in 30 years. And when I reflect on all the kindness and support that I've received, it's sort of my intention to try and slow down and track those people down, just to let them know what an effect they had in my life. When I think of this class and how it's grown, I have such deep appreciation for Bob and Mike and Barb and the yoga teachers who offer their services, without any set fee, the church. So much generosity goes into making this happen. So I thought we would close with a couple of short reflections. There's a beautiful book. I forget who wrote it. I think it may have been Joseph Goldstein. And the title of the book is Compassion is a Verb. And we think of it as a concept, but we only know compassion when it's in action. So I'd like to lead just a short reflection. So if you like, again, you can close your eyes. And I'd like to offer a brief reflection on a generous act that you might take on. Is there someone in your life that might be needing some kind of support? Is there someone in your life you might reach out to thank for something kind or generous they may have done for you. And if you were to do that, what would that feel like on the inside? Is there some way that you might offer your wealth? Someone, some organization that might greatly benefit from a financial boost? Is there some way you might offer your wisdom, which might be a call to someone or to listen, to let someone know you're thinking about them? Is there some way you might offer your work, some action that would be an act of generosity? And over the next few moments, just if you can think of one act of generosity you might take on as a practice, what would that be? And when you're ready, you can deepen your breath, and if you like, you can again open your eyes. One of my heroes in life was my father. My father was someone who I think of as a well-wisher of all. He genuinely liked people and really, he wanted the best for everyone. He could also be, as I would describe him, as a socially active Quaker. He could also be an angry pacifist, which was kind of fun to watch. But he was very generous. There's a beautiful story of a meditation teacher, and many people would say, "I'm so grateful for what you offer. What can I give in return?" And he would always say, "Practice with sincerity and diligence." And what a beautiful response! Because he knew that when you practice non-judging awareness with sincerity and diligence, it will bring not only you great happiness, but everyone in your life that you will touch will receive that. So it's just important to know that when you make a donation to this class or to the podcast, that a portion of what you give goes to support the church. And the church, they keep their lights on and their doors open for us. Many nights they close the church in order to save money. It also goes to support the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and all the ways that they support having classes throughout the metro area and diversity and bringing meditation into those who are incarcerated. And a portion goes to me as well. And I deeply thank you for your support. It really allows me to continue to do what I do. I'd like to close with a story which I may have shared before, but it's one that really speaks to how acting from generosity can be really magical. So if you like, you can close your eyes. Once there were two brothers who inherited their father's land. The brothers divided the land in half, and each one farmed his own section. Over time, the older brother married and had 6 children, while the younger brother never married. One night, the younger brother lay awake. "It's not fair that each of us has half the land to farm," he thought. My brother has 6 children to feed, and I have none. He should have more grain than I do." So that night the younger brother went to his silo, gathered a large bundle of wheat, and climbed the hill that separated the 2 farms and over to his brother's farm. Leaving the wheat in his brother's silo, the younger brother returned home, feeling pleased. Earlier that same night, the older brother was also lying awake. "It's not fair that each of us has half the land to farm," he thought. "In my old age, my wife and I will have our grown children to take care of us, not to mention grandchildren. And my brother will probably have none. He should at least sell more grain from the fields now so he can provide for himself with dignity in his old age." So that night, too, he secretly gathered a large bundle of wheat, climbed the hill, and left it in his brother's silo and returned home, feeling pleased. The next morning, the younger brother was surprised to see the amount of grain in his barn. "I must not have taken as much wheat as I thought. Tonight I'll be sure to take more." That very same moment, his older brother was also standing in his barn, musing much the same thoughts. After night fell, each brother gathered a greater amount of wheat from his barn and in the dark secretly delivered it to the brother's barn. The next morning, the brothers were again puzzled and perplexed. "How can I be mistaken? There's the same amount of grain here as there was before I cleared the pile for my brother. This is impossible. Tonight, I'll make no mistake. I'll take the pile down to the very floor. That way I'll be sure the grain gets delivered to my brother." The third night, more determined than ever, each brother gathered a large pile of wheat from his barn, loaded onto a cart, and slowly pulled his haul through the fields and up the hill to his brother's barn. At the top of the hill, under a shadow of the moon, each brother noticed a figure in the distance. Who could it be? When the 2 brothers recognized the form of the other brother and the load he was pulling behind, they realized what had happened. Without a word, they dropped the ropes to their carts and embraced. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. That pretty much says it all.